Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk Wonder Woman. A subscriber of mine, he was saying that he thought that Wonder Woman was not connected at all to the DCEU's running theme and the setup for the Justice League. He said it was the least connected DCEU movie. He thought the critics said the same thing. It seemed to be a standalone movie and it wasn't connected to the DCEU, and he thought that that would affect Justice League, the fact that there's nothing in Wonder Woman that ties into Justice League. And he didn't see that the movie was tied in much to BVS, so he thought it was the least tied in movie. Alright? And I'm listening to him, but I told him on YouTube, I told him, look, there's actually a particular reason why Zack Snyder, Jeff Johns, and the rest of the crew from Warner Brothers DC is doing these films in a particular order, and they actually have a particular plan. I said, if you understand the particular plan, this will all make sense to you. And he said, yes, I know they have a plan, but he says this is a setback because, you know, this movie's not tied into Justice League. It did nothing for Justice League. We look at the after credit scenes, nothing. You know, there's nothing really connected to Justice League. So I'm going to show this subscriber, and I'm going to show you guys how deeply connected Wonder Woman is to Justice League and to BVS and to everything else. But first of all, there was a question I asked you: why is Warner Brothers doing Batman v Superman, then Wonder Woman, and then Justice League? Why are they doing the movies in that order? Now the answer is right there: Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman. The key that melts all these movies together is Wonder Woman. So the standalone absolutely links to Justice League and absolutely links BVS to Justice League. Okay? But the way how Warner Brothers does things, they don't just overtly do things. They don't tell you everything they're doing. Sometimes they show you, and they very subtly weave in what they are doing. Now I'm going to show you how much and how brilliant Zack Snyder is. By the end of this movie, you're going to say he's a genius, because Zack didn't do this in a linear fashion, but yes, it had a connecting thread to each of these movies. And it's very important to understand this because Wonder Woman plays a pivotal role in so many ways to not just the Justice League, not just to the DCEU, but to DC in general. And so she's very important. You will notice that she's the central piece of the Trinity. Okay? And that's very important for you to understand. She's central to the Trinity. Okay? There's no other woman there. There's Batman, there's Superman, but there's Wonder Woman in the middle. Do you notice that? In BVS, she was in the middle. Batman, Superman were on the side. She was in the middle. And she wasn't just in the middle. If you look, if you paid attention, she was also at the forefront. She was middle, center, front. She was leading them. And she was leading the battle against Doomsday. There is a reason why that is so. And so I will explain all of this to you guys so you will get the full understanding of how key Wonder Woman is to the DCEU and how central she is to the DCEU. That's why they had to get her right. And they had to do this movie right. And this movie is positioned correctly. Alright? So you guys are going to get everything right now in this video. So let's get into it. So first and foremost, the first movie in the DCEU was Man of Steel. Right? That kick-started the DCEU. And DC stands for Detective Comics. Okay? Detective Comics. And then EU stands for Extended Universe. Okay? So DCEU stands for Detective Comics Extended Universe. Now the DC Comics did not come into being when Superman first appeared on the comic book scene. The very first comic book superhero was Superman. That was back in June, as you can see there, 1938. It was the first issue of Action Comics, which would later become DC Comics or Detective Comics, but Action Comics would run separate to Detective Comics anyway. And as you can see, in the very first issue of Action Comics, Superman appeared. And if you look at the cover there, this is very important to pay attention to what I'm saying now. The cover of Action Comics. Superman has lifted a car. There's some people running away from him as he's smashing that car into a rock, into a post. Okay? You can see this man running away, that man running away, that man running away. It's very important to remember what I just said. Okay? This is the very first comic of a super-powered superhero. Superman. The beginning of the superhero genre and superhero comics. And his first action is to smash a car into smithereens while the occupants scamper away from it and run every which way. Remember that. So Superman in the DC Extended Universe also kickstarts the DC Extended Universe with Man of Steel, following a pattern. Okay, Superman kickstarts this universe. Superman kickstart the superhero genre and superhero comic books. They are very similar. Following Superman came Batman. And Batman came in the year 1939, May of 1939, almost a year after, right? Where does Batman appear in the DCEU? He appears in the very next DCEU movie, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. Do you see a pattern here? In terms of superheroes being launched off, Batman is the second superhero launched off. This time he's launched off in what we call DC Comics today, but back then it was known as Detective Comics. It wasn't just an exclusive superhero comic book. It was actually a comic book based on detective thriller comics, where there was always a case to be solved. And this later will become DC Comics. Okay? And this was May of 1939. Pay attention again to the cover of the comic. Pay attention to what Batman is doing on the cover of that comic. It's very important to pay attention to these comics, okay? Because I have a point to make. So there's Batman from Batman v Superman. Now, after Batman v Superman, we had Suicide Squad, which was an intermediate DC comic book issue that came out, and it was more related to Batman. So you can think of Batman appearing in two films. It's like Batman comic extension. Okay, so Batman and then Batman's villains. Okay, so still Batman. It's still keeping in course with Batman. But after that came the comic Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman premiered through All Star Comics. And the December to January issue actually it came out in October. I think it was October issue. And Wonder Woman was introduced inside of that comic. So if you look at the sequence of events in the DCEU, they match the sequence of events of these comic book superheroes appearing in the early comics of DC. They weren't called DC at the time. They were Action Comics and Detective Comics and All-Star Comics. But nonetheless, these were the beginnings of DC Comics. These characters would later become DC comic characters. Now, why this is very important is because there is a context to what is happening here. Okay? And we will come back to this cover. Pay attention to this cover of Wonder Woman. She didn't appear in her own comic book, and she wasn't on a cover of a comic book per se. She was inside of All-Star Comics. And by the way, All-Star Comics had the members, as you can see, of the Justice Society of America. I talked about this before sometime. But I want you to understand what Zack Snyder is doing. He is repeating how these comic book characters appeared in the comic books. Okay? So that's the first set of genius right there. Okay? What came after this? What came after the advent of Wonder Woman was she joined the Justice League. And what is the next movie coming up? Justice League. Okay? I'm just saying, so you guys can see how brilliant Zack Snyder is, how brilliant this strategy is. Okay? So Zack Snyder's not doing it the conventional way that Marvel did it, where we go and we get introduced to the background characters, we learn who they all are, and then we launch into this thing. No, he's doing it in the order it actually happened in history with the comic books. Zack Snyder is such a comic book fan that Zack Snyder is doing these comics in the order the characters actually appeared and were created from the comics. Do you like that? Okay, let's keep on going on this journey. We're not done. There's more to this. So, in this article by Jill Lepore, you remember Jill Lepore? If you do remember Jill Lepore, I'm glad. She talks about Wonder Woman's unwinnable war. And I reference to Jill Lepore because she's a historian. She put out an article in the Smithsonian, and she also has the secret origins of Wonder Woman, which talk about Matthew, what the hell am I talking about? William Marston, who camouflaged his name as Charles Marston, and actually Sony will be coming out with a short movie on that, which will explain the story behind the creation of Wonder Woman and all the secrets of Charles Marston's life, aka the real name, Mr. William Marston. Okay? He had a secret life. Anyway, what I want to tell you is a recap of all that we have just said. She talks about Superman appearing in 1938, Batman in 1939, and Wonder Woman in 1941. Do realize that we had Batman, we had Man of Steel, which was Superman's appearance in 1938. Then we had Batman v Superman, which was Batman's appearance in 1939, as well as Suicide Squad, where Batman was in there. And then now we have Wonder Woman, which comes out the following year instead of 2 years later. The following year, Wonder Woman comes out. And what's beautiful about this is that Zack Snyder somehow, some way, has been able to create the ambience and the reason why people will actually want to see Wonder Woman. I don't know if this was planned, but it's ingenious. I'll show you what I mean. So, Superman and Batman were out there, okay? And here's the interesting thing. When you go through this article, you find out this. Where am I? I'll show you in a minute. Okay. Okay, here it is. So Wonder Woman was actually created from the start to quiet a controversy. In the 1940s, after critics complained that Superman and Batman were too violent, All American Comics hired a consultant, a psychologist, lawyer, all-round rascal, and one-time Hollywood PR man named William Moulton Marston. With their help, he pitched a comic book featuring a female superhero whose enemy is inequality. Wonder Woman was conceived by Dr. Marston to set up a standard among children and young people of strong, free, courageous womanhood, and to combat the idea that women are inferior to men. A press release explained, because the only hope for civilization is the greater freedom, development, and equality of women. So that is one of the answers there, but there's even more. So let me go to another article that Jill Lepore did, and it speaks a little bit more deeply about this subject. Let me just see here. Okay, I believe it may be in here. I hope so. So, Jill Lepore, yes, this is it. This was an interview with Jill Lepore by Michelle Martin, okay? And Michelle Martin, she may have been the one also who interviewed William Marston's granddaughter. But anyway, Jill Lepore goes into more detail about Superman and Batman and how they were so violent, okay? So Jill Lepore says, Wonder Woman started in 1941. She was really kind of a publicity stunt. Superhero comics were flying off the shelves. They cost a dime. Kids were reading them, but parents had gotten really concerned, and comic books were being banned. They were being burned in town commons, And so the publisher of Justice League stories hired the world's most famous consultant psychologist, this guy who was something of a rascal named William Moulton Marston, bring him to give advice. What should we do about this controversy? And Marston came up with this idea. He said, what you need is a female superhero. So Martin says, well, why were they so controversial? What is it that people were so upset about? And what was Wonder Woman supposed to be the antidote to? The blood-curdling masculinity is how Marston described it of the comics. It was mostly their violence, but there was also specific complaints. Superman looked to a lot of grown-ups like a Nietzschean Ubermensch. He was a man from a master race. People thought that he was kind of a secret propagandist for fascism. And people forget this, but when Batman started out, Batman had a gun. And the United States had a very strong aversion to the glorification of gun violence. And Batman had to lose his gun. That's where Charles Marston got his original story. He ended up he had the whole origin story about how he had traumatized by seeing his parents shot. Oh, that's Batman, sorry. That's how Batman got his origin story. That's one solution to the problem. But Marston said that what you really need is a female superhero who's opposed to violence, whose strengths are love and truth and beauty. So Wonder Woman came as a result of Superman and Batman being too violent, and I'm going to show you how true that is, and that Superman seemed to be exhibiting attributes of fascism. Fascism. I want to show you something. If you look at Superman in the cover of Action Comics, what is he doing? He's smashing a car, right? He's smashing a car. Now this comes from the story where Superman goes out with Lois Lane. He's not Superman, he's actually Clark Kent, mild-mannered. And they go out and Lois Lane wants to dance with him, but he can't dance with her. And so she goes off with another guy, and these people kidnap her and they take her away. And Clark sees that and he comes out of his outfit and becomes Superman. He flies ahead of them and he basically tries to block them by standing in their way. And they were about to drive him over, and he jumps over the car. As you can see here, he jumped over the car, and then they realize he's chasing them down. Superman chases them down, okay? But all he cares about is Lois Lane. So when he catches up with the car, he rips off a piece of the car, rips into the car, I think he rips out a door, takes Lois out of the car, and then gets her to safety. Once she's safely away, he comes back to the car, lifts it up with all the occupants in it, and proceeds to smash the car. And so the men have to dive out the car for safety. So he takes his powers and he doesn't even care. He's kind of like Batman and Batman v Superman. He doesn't even care about the occupants. He just smashes the car. If the occupants die in it, so be it. So this is the kind of violence that people were talking about. But that's not all. There's much more. So here's Superman. And he's interrogating this guy, trying to find out what's really going on. So he says, who is behind you in corrupting Senator Barros? I don't know what you're talking about, says the man, because he overheard a conversation between the man and Senator Barros. Sir, you're the one of these silent men, eh? We'll see whether you'll talk. Let go of my hand. And then he just leaps way up in the air. Superman couldn't fly at the time. He used to leap buildings in a single bound. Your foot will do just as well. And he leaps up in the air, and the guy's scared as crazy. And the guy's like, stop, stop, we'll be electrocuted. Because there's some power lines that Superman jumps over. No, we won't. And oh my God, he's walking on a power line. Birds sit on telephone wire, and they aren't electrocuted. And he takes the guy and scares him stiffless. I think he jumps with him all the way to the top of a building. And the guy's so scared, and he says, I'll talk. And he says, okay. So Superman was more like Batman. He used to put the fear in the heart of criminals, okay? Here's another one. And that, readers, is the astounding way that Jimmy Olsen first met Superman. Thanks for the souvenir, Superman. Gosh, it's odd that I first met you as a baby back on Krypton. Yes, and you saved my space rocket. And as a reward, you've been my pal all these years. But there's one thing I never told you before, Jimmy. But Superman gives Jimmy a gun. When I was a naughty child back on Krypton, you once spanked me. A fine way to treat your future pal. Holy cow, did I really do that when I was your babysitter? So Superman had an attitude, okay? Superman had an attitude. You'd be like, that was Superman? Yeah, that was Golden Age Superman, okay? There's more. Superman's running and saving, I believe this is Lois Lane again. What manner of being are you? Save the questions, he tells the woman. Oh my God, yes, Superman wasn't charming. Finally, Superman drops toward the ground into the first of the torturer's inquisition. You'll tell me how many men there are on your, whatever is this, watchment, or, and Superman grabs the guy. Let me go, what are you going to do? Give you the fate you deserve, you torturing devil. So he picks up the man, and for an instant, Superman poises the torturer overhead. So he lifts him up, and he just tosses the guy. She's like, what? Superman would do something like that? And then tosses him away as though he were hurling a javelin. Oh my God. The torturer vanishes from view behind the grove of distant trees with a pitiful wail. Obviously, he tossed him to his death. So this is the kind of Superman we were dealing with. Okay, here it is again. Superman unites the torturer's captives bonds. Okay, he unties. You're free to flee. Good luck. We owe our lives to you. Later, after depositing Lois near the Barunta, Superman advises her to return to America. But when will I see you again? Who knows? Perhaps tomorrow. Perhaps never. Yep, that's the writing for Superman. It's not done though. And now to attend to Norville. Norville's this guy flying a plane or something. And Norville's flying this plane, or they're shooting something at there. But when Superman returns to his detachment, he finds anti-aircraft guns booming. The camp is being mercilessly riddled by a bloodthirsty aviator. Die like crawling ants! Superman leaps to the attack. For the first time in all history, a man battles an airplane single-handed. And the plane booms towards Superman's figure, guns blazing. And into a head-on crash. Its propeller shattered upon Superman's skin. The airplane falls to its doom. Norville had witnessed the crash. Good. That finishes my nemesis. So Superman basically kills the pilot. Okay? So that's the kind of guy Superman was. And yeah, that is fascist behavior. At 211 Court Avenue. Hold it! What do you want? This man's beating up his wife, right? Don't get tough. Tough is, putting it mildly, the treatment you're going to get. You're not fighting a woman now. And he smashes the man into a wall. Oh my God. So you understand why the parents were saying this was excessively violent, and Superman had to be like a fascist or something, you know? This is why they were saying this, right? He's a super race. He comes from Krypton. He talks about giving a boy a gun. He's scaring people stiff. And he's killing people. He's like throwing people all over the place. He's smashing into planes and letting the plane crash. The people crash to their death. This is Golden Age Superman, okay? So there was an outcry that Superman was a fascist. But you think that's all? So you were going to shoot me, eh? Just for that, I'm going to shoot you. No, that would be murder. Disregarding Rebel's pleas, the Man of Tomorrow fires. Yeah! Bang! But before the bullet can reach him, Superman's other hand darts out and catches it. Unless you quit your subversive activities, next time I won't bother to catch it. That ought to throw a scare, maybe a little sense into them. Now to return to my apartment. And he just bursts through people's houses. He doesn't care. He just destroys things. That's the Superman that people were protesting about, even though the youths, the young people, love the comics. They love the stories. But this was like a gangster. Superman was like a gangster, man. He was gangster. He was just bursting in and doing whatever the heck he wanted to do. So yeah, they thought he was a fascist. Okay? In the 1940s. I think it was exactly 1940, actually, that happened. And Batman, like we said, he was toting a gun. The Batman, weird figure of darkness, again prowls forth to strike another blow against crime. Police Commissioner Gordon sits chatting with his friend, Bruce Wayne, unaware that he is Batman. I tell you, Bruce, if I ever catch the Batman, pardon me, sir, but one wants to see you, says it's urgent. Okay, so Batman used to carry a gun, but that's not all. Here he is again. This was DC Comics 44, and you see him with a gun here. That's not all. He used the gun. And now to find the open tomb which these vampires sleep and bring them deaths that will release Julie. So he goes to the tomb. Batman pauses before the open tombs of the vampires. Never again will you do never again will you harm any mortal being. Bow! He shoots the gun here and shuts the vampire dead. The spell is broken and life returns once again to Julie. I don't know who you are, but you saved my life, and I shall be forever grateful. And then he goes off into the dark of the night. Because Batman was actually a scary figure. He was like Darkman, you know. And he killed people. Oh yes, he killed people. There's a sickening snap as the Crossex's neck breaks under the mighty pressure of the Batman foot. And they called him the Batman's foot. So they called him the Batman. So when you saw that Zack Snyder was calling him the Batman or the Bat, and they were calling Superman the Superman, this is where Zack Snyder got it from. Now what's interesting is the same outcry that they had for Batman and Superman was the same outcry they had for Batman v Superman movie, if you do think about it, right? So up pops Wonder Woman here. But before I get into that, let me just show you from the Mary Sue what they say. Dawn of Fascists, examining authoritarianism in superhero fiction. This was after Batman v Superman and fundamental civil liberties. Now this was explored also in The Dark Knight Returns, where they were calling Batman a fascist, okay? And then Batman was calling Superman a fascist, and it was actually a fascist regime under Lex Luthor. If you go and read the trilogy of the Batman Returns comics or graphic novels, there's another one. There's the Batman. There's the Dark Knight. The Dark Knight Returns, and I think then there's the Dark Knight something, and then there's the Dark Knight something. It's three of them. It's a trilogy. Okay? But what's interesting is that I remember people saying that Superman, he's emo Superman, and he's very fascist in how he was giving ultimatums to Batman. You know, and then Batman was considered, again, very violent. And people were saying he was just too brutal. He was just killing people. He was like a murderer. What was the difference between him and what's the dude's name? I can't remember what the guy's name is. The Punisher. What was the difference between him and the Punisher, right? Well, guess what? This issue was the same issue. Somehow Zack Snyder managed to create that same ambience that happened in the 1940s, where the parents were like, kids can't see these things, so they started burning the comics, and they needed a PR machine to change it around. And guess what? That's when Wonder Woman came into the picture. And the very same thing was happening in the DCEU. People were saying, someone needs to save the DCEU. Would it be Suicide Squad? Now they came up with Wonder Woman. Will she save the DCEU? And now everybody's saying this is what a superhero should be. Wonder Woman is that superhero, and everybody's raining praise right now. And Wonder Woman's getting overall very positive reception, critically and also by the audience. Isn't that what's happening right now? Now, I'm not done, because I said that Wonder Woman is the thread that links Batman v Superman to Justice League. And like I said before, Zack Snyder and Company Limited, they know what they're doing. Okay? We saw that the order that these comic book movies are coming out in the cinemas now is actual order that these comic book movies actually came out with these great characters. Now we see also a parallel between the reason why Wonder Woman even came to be. And Zack Snyder planted that. Everybody will agree. The best character in Batman v Superman was Wonder Woman. Nobody has any complaints about her. Isn't that right? It was set up that way. Okay? Zack Snyder's a brilliant, I tell you. He set it up. Zack Snyder is very much pro women's rights. I tell you guys, go back. If you haven't seen that movie, go look for it online for free. Sucker Punch. Go check out that movie. Okay? You can also go check out Watchmen. Watch how Zack Snyder particularly treats his lead female characters in movies. Okay? You can go watch 300, Rise of the Empire, where the Queen takes over. Watch how he treats his female characters. Him and also, what's his name? The guy who is right now directing Zack's films. He's very much pro-feminist. Joss Whedon. Very pro-feminist. And that's why Zack's pretty comfortable with Josh directing Justice League, because he knows he'll do Wonder Woman justice. Everybody's talking about Wonder Woman, and now she will have a much more prominent role in Justice League, hopefully, and so on and so on and so on. Zack was setting it up because Wonder Woman is a key part in this franchise, a key part in this universe. She is a leader. She takes action. She gets things done. And she will be a very important part. If you look at the Justice League, when Wonder Woman drops down in between Aquaman and Cyborg, she's the one leading the charge in the Justice League. Did you see that? Okay. Now for my connection with Wonder Woman, the film. Well, Wonder Woman is the first actual member of the Trinity to include Greek mythology. The advent of the gods is first spoken about in Wonder Woman. Superman was an alien that came from Krypton. Batman was a vigilante who turned vigilante because of his traumatic experience, which they added in later issues of Batman to account for his violence and then to get him stripped of using guns. Okay? Because they thought he was way too violent, they needed to tone him down. Wonder Woman was the person who introduced Greek mythology. Now, how Warner Brothers was able to do this was very brilliant. They introduced Suicide Squad, which was an extension of Batman's mythology. And by introducing Suicide Squad, not only did they debut a little bit more of the Flash in there, but they also were able to introduce magic, so that it could set the tone for Wonder Woman to prep you for the gods. Wonder Woman, as I said before, is the least realistic of all the DCEU movies. It's more fantasy than it is reality. Of course, it is Diana's account, which they use so they can sort of flex time how they want to use it. But very importantly, it was able to introduce the gods. And Zack Snyder again did this. It's very Snyderish. Zack is the one giving the backstory for the gods. And they did it through Hippolyta's account to Diana. So not all of the account that Hippolyta gives to Diana is true, but it still gives you a sketch and a framework. Now, for my subscribers, so you will understand how tightly Wonder Woman is actually interwoven with the Justice League, you must understand that Wonder Woman introduced the gods. You cannot introduce the new gods if you don't introduce the gods themselves. This is why Wonder Woman plays a key point and a pivotal point in the Justice League. Further, once you introduce the gods, which introduced Ares, which made Wonder Woman fight Ares at the end of Wonder Woman, now we can talk about the new gods. Now, it's very important to understand the new gods actually replace the gods themselves. So that it's very important that in the story, Hippolyta had to talk about how a god removed most of the old gods, so that we can look at the new gods. Now, it's very important to understand how the Amazons play a role in this whole thing. Because remember, the Amazons were created by the god Zeus. Zeus is no longer alive. We know this now. Are any of the other gods alive? I don't think so, except for Ares. For whatever reason, they're not alive. Whether it is that Ares killed them or not. But here's the most important part. The Amazons, the Atlanteans, the humans, and the Thanagarians, and the Kryptonians, they all exist in this universe. And it sets a framework for talking now about some other aliens very far, far away that Lex Luthor alluded to, who are actually part of the New Gods. So they couldn't introduce the New Gods in Wonder Woman. It would make sense to do that, since according to the later editions, Justice League comes to be, and then we have the New Gods. This happens a lot later on. So since Zack Snyder is following that chronology, my subscriber friend, he would introduce the New Gods after Wonder Woman and not while he's introducing Wonder Woman. As I can show you here, Wonder Woman by William Marston actually speaks about the gods, but not about the New Gods in its very first issue. It is later on, with the Justice League formed, when Wonder Woman joins the Justice League or is forming the Justice League, that the New Gods are introduced, which makes sense that Justice League, which is the upcoming movie, would introduce the New Gods. Okay? So like I said, everything here is planned by Warner Brothers. Even the fact that Aquaman comes after is also sort of planned. Now let's move into a couple other things for you guys to bear in mind here. The other thing that's very interesting about this movie, now I'm going to go into spoiler territory here, folks, so if you don't want to hear it, stop this video right now. If you haven't seen Wonder Woman, stop the video, forget about it. But I'm going to go into spoiler territory now. Spoiler territory. The first thing you see on Bruce Wayne's armored trucks is the initials JL. You saw that? You might have seen JL. So, first of all, Bruce Wayne is dropping something into Diana, but Bruce Wayne has spoken to Diana about gathering the members of the Justice League. And apparently Bruce and Diana are now conversing, which means Diana is helping Bruce to bring together the members of the Justice League. So that's the first thing you need to note. I tell you, it's very sneaky in these movies. You have to pay attention. The second thing you will notice is while Diana is doing a flashback and she comes back to present time, it fills in the gaps for the conversation she had with Bruce Wayne from BVS. If I do recall correctly, Bruce Wayne talks about getting the others. And the first thing Diana says is, what? And she says, what others? And she says, the others like you. And she says, what if they don't want to be found? Remember when she said that? Now there's a lot of significance to that statement from Wonder Woman the movie, because we know that the Amazons, which Wonder Woman came from, they were hidden away by Zeus and they were not to be found. And what is very interesting about this is this is just my suspicion, Diana never went back to the Amazons and Themyscira, and the reason why is because she cannot find the Amazons of Themyscira, because the Amazons of Themyscira, as they were put, there was a shield around them by Zeus, which tells me it's an interdimensional portal. That's what I think that shield is. That's why you see daylight in Themyscira, but it's dark and cloudy outside of the shield. That shield is an interdimensional portal where Themyscira is actually located on Earth. And somehow Steve Trevor was able to pass through that portal at a given instant in time. And therefore, he accidentally stumbled upon Themyscira, and the people following him simply followed him and got into Themyscira. But apparently, this portal at any given time is somewhere else in the world, which is what explains why Diana was able to go through that interdimensional portal with Steve and end up pretty close to London. So that's what I think it means by what if they don't want to be found. Because Diana knows she can't go back to Themyscira just like that. And that is why her mother said, if you leave, you may never return. Not talking about Diana's death only, but the fact that Themyscira is hidden away. And Diana has no way of finding Themyscira just like that. Which leads us to another problem. How does Diana contact the Amazons if she has to in Justice League? Who knows? But we know that Diana has been living amongst men in the world of men since that time. Now there was another conversation at the end of BVS that has been answered in Wonder Woman and connects Wonder Woman to Justice League. So I'm starting to explain different things to you guys where you have not been able to fill in the blanks because it wasn't obvious. Diana said, I walked away from the world of man. Man has made it such that man lives in a world such that they cannot work together. It's impossible for them to work together. Okay? Man has made a world where it's impossible for them to work together. Now, what Wonder Woman the movie has explained in quite good detail and very clearly is why Diana has made that statement. It is not that Diana has abandoned mankind, but she has not, as she did in the beginning, declared herself unto mankind and walked among man as Wonder Woman. Okay? She didn't unrobe herself. You notice that at the end of Wonder Woman, Diana is once again clothed as other men. And she's walking amongst men with Etta Candy and also with what I think is the future Blackhawks. And she's walking in a crowd. But she has not declared herself as Wonder Woman. She does not want any praise for anything. She has just started to walk among men and has hidden herself among men. Okay? But it doesn't mean that she doesn't operate within that 100 years as Wonder Woman. How do I know this? In Batman v Superman, when Diana realizes the threat with Doomsday, and it's a serious threat, she leaves the airplane, but when she appears with Bruce Wayne to defend Batman, she's geared up as Wonder Woman, which means her suit had to be nearby. What's she doing walking around with her suit, her Wonder Woman suit? And the answer to that question is given at the end of Wonder Woman. In the day, she is a curator, but in the night, she fights crime as Wonder Woman. But she does not declare herself as Wonder Woman to the world. The whole world does not know yet that she's Wonder Woman, like how the whole world knew about Clark Kent being Superman. Well, they didn't know Clark Kent was Superman, but Superman used to move around the world and people knew who he was. She wasn't moving like that. She was moving more underground, it seems. Okay? And regardless, all the people who knew her as Wonder Woman, they would have died off by now. So that is what I think she meant by, I left the world of men. So she was kind of in hiding. Now, when we see her in this movie, Wonder Woman, and Bruce Wayne is leaving that message with the Justice League to her, this is after Suicide Squad. So this is not only after BVS, this is also after the events in Suicide Squad, which means that Bruce Wayne is rounding up the members of the Justice League. He's getting help with Diana, and apparently he sent Diana the original photo. So somehow, some way, he found that original photo that Lex Luthor was looking for, and he brought it to Diana. And he said, someday you must tell me the story behind this. And Diana starts to narrate the story as she reflects back in her mind about it. And one of the artifacts that she ends up the story with is a watch. And that watch is the watch Steve Trevor valued that his grandfather gave him. And that watch always reminds Steve Trevor of his responsibility to do the best he can instead of doing nothing, hoping to be able to help some people. And Diana held that watch to remind her of her own obligation to help mankind, which is why you saw her dive out the window and glide on air over the city after that. I think that's the Louvre. That's either London she was gliding towards, or that's some part of France, because the Louvre is somewhere in France. So that is yet another connection to Justice League. And the other thing that connects this movie to Justice League, it didn't have to have a post-credit scene, because the movie ends on a sort of post-credit scene in the present time, is that Wonder Woman was working in the Louvre when Batman saw her, right? Oh, well, not in the Louvre, but she's a curator, right? In Justice League, she continues to be a curator. And if you look at the clothing she was wearing, it is similar to the clothing she is seen in Justice League wearing in one of the trailers. So, yet again, there's another connection. There's some connective tissue to Wonder Woman and Batman in this movie. And, of course, people are talking about they should have shown Bruce Wayne on the top of the roof. That would be corny and that would be stupid, okay? Because this movie is about Wonder Woman. But yet, at the same time, there's some more connective tissue. Let me give you a bunch more connective tissue here that connects Wonder Woman to BVS, okay, and Wonder Woman also to Suicide Squad. Now, everybody was wondering why Wonder Woman never appeared to deal with the threat in Suicide Squad. Well, we know now why. She was in Europe. She was in France. She was far away from Atlantic City, okay? She was far away from that place. She was far away from Bruce Wayne and all those people. And Bruce Wayne, all his trucks were in France, because Bruce Wayne's all over the world. He's a millionaire. He's a billionaire, playboy. Even so, Diana was far removed from Bruce Wayne. And here's the connective tissue. Remember, Diana was going on a plane to head out? Now we know where she went. So she was in the United States of America for some curation stuff, to get the stuff from Lex Luthor. She interacted with Bruce Wayne. She was tracking him down for some reason. She knew where he was. And she was able to get, she found out about the information that Lex Luthor had on his drive. Bruce Wayne sends her this information. She's in Europe at the point in time. Her plane was going to fly out to go to Europe. So here's some more connective tissue for you. So from BVS, we know that Diana is right now in Europe. That's why she was not aware of the events occurring in Suicide Squad. Apparently, Diana came across the United States because of Lex Luthor. And apparently in Justice League, she's going to come back to the United States because Bruce Wayne left her this piece of information. But all the while, she has been Wonder Woman, moving around, helping people, still doing equality, because she can't help it. She likes to help people. Diana is never going to stop. And if in World War I she didn't stop, she probably didn't stop up to this time. But it's just that she's doing it more on the D-low than she's doing it in public. So when Batman and they needed help, Superman and Batman needed help because of Doomsday, and she knew somebody had to step up to do something, she stepped up to the table, did what she needed to do, and then she disappeared again into her curating and stuff. Because Wonder Woman's a person who does what needs to be done. She doesn't need to be seen so much as she does what she needs to be done. And that's what this take on it is. So yeah, she's firmly connected to BVS. And that's why her own singular movie was very important, because she is one of the centerpieces of the Justice League. She's the superpowered person. Batman's not the superpowered person. She is actually going to be one of the leaders of the Justice League along with Batman. They're going to pull the Justice League together. Now, I'm not too sure if we're going to see Hippolyta in the beginning of the Justice League fighting off Doomsday, along with the Atlanteans and with the Thanagarians and with the Amazonians, or this is going to be later on. I suspect it's going to be earlier on. We're going to get some story again, because Zack Snyder seems to be doing this Justice League film in a much more linear fashion to his other films. So if you didn't know what the connective tissue was and how deeply connected Wonder Woman, this movie, is connected to all of the DCEU, more than Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad was connected to Superman's death. Suicide Squad was connected to Batman and the Flash, just really small ways. And then we know Flash and Batman will end up being members of the Justice League. They're not currently at this present time. But that was the connection Suicide Squad had. Wonder Woman is so much more deeply connected to Batman, Batman v Superman, Superman, in so many deeper ways. But for you to understand these things, you have to understand what Zack Snyder and company is doing. So this is how the DCEU is following. It's not haphazard. It's not something that hasn't been well thought out. They know what they're doing with these characters. They know what they're doing to set up these characters so you would get a certain kind of feeling. They want you to walk through the comic books, through the golden era, all the way up to the present, and get a sense of how people in the past felt about these characters and how they feel about them now. So they're giving you a very rich, deep history of these characters leading up to Justice League. And when they do show up in Justice League, you're really going to get a good sense and a good taste of these characters, which will make you long for Aquaman and the Flash and, you know, Shazam and Hawkman and, Cyborg. You know, you'll get a feeling of them. So Justice League is going to tie all those loose ends together, just like All-Star Comics did with Justice Society of America, and you're going to get the Justice League feel in the Justice League movie. But they wanted to give you a good, solid foundation about these characters in the way how they were presented from the comics. And that's what Zack Snyder does. And that's I hope you guys understand. Charles Roven, Zack Snyder, Jeff Johns, John Berg, Deborah Snyder, all of the directors from David Ayer to Patty Jenkins. So far, they've been laying this foundation. By the way, another thing that's very important that came from another video I did, which was the granddaughter of Charles Morstan. She said the granddaughter of Charles Morstan didn't really bother with so much with the story because he wasn't really a comic book writer. He was more interested in the character of Wonder Woman. And so it was all about the character of Wonder Woman. If you look, Patty Jenkins, and Warner Brothers was very specific about this, Patty Jenkins directed the story of Wonder Woman in a flashback through Wonder Woman's eyes. The focus was severely focused on Wonder Woman. This story was Wonder Woman. It was about Wonder Woman. The advertising was about Wonder Woman. Everything was focused on Wonder Woman. And that's exactly how Charles Marston, aka William Marston, was directing his comic. It was focused on Diana. It was focused on Wonder Woman. So very much they're capturing the early spirit of these comics and they're bringing them to life in a very specific way. Warner Brothers, Zack Snyder, Charles Roven, Deborah Snyder, Jeff Johns, John Berg have a very specific vision for these comics so that people will actually go and read the comics. It's a very, very specific vision, and I just wanted to expose and bring it to light so you guys could get an idea and you could actually predict what comic should come next. Alright? So on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed my very deep, in detailed video about Wonder Woman, where she fits into the DCEU, why she is so important for the DCEU, why Warner Brothers had to get her correct, and they did, and she's pivotal to everything in this DCEU. This DCEU is as much led by men as it is led by women. That's why Joss Whedon's going to bring out Batgirl, and I'm telling you, man, I really enjoy and appreciate how much thought and how much process went into this DCEU. It's unlike any other universe before it, and I like that. I appreciate it. I'm not somebody who's frivolous, and I don't like to waste my time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget that you can donate to my channel. To donate to my channel, please go to my About section and message me, because I would love to do more in-depth videos about these characters with time. Thank you for spending your time with me. You guys have a great one.